I'm Sue Hausman, Manager of Education for the Viking Sewing Machine Company. And it's my pleasure to be here with you for the next hour or so, demonstrating some of the exciting, decorative, and creative techniques that you can do on your new Viking Husqvarna 1100. We are so happy that you have completed your basic lesson series, and we hope you've had an opportunity to view our Viking video basic lesson series tape. And if you haven't, be sure to ask your dealer about the handbook and the tape that are available to you. But for this afternoon, we're going to be concentrating on the beautiful sewing book called Pictograms and So Much More. Thanks to the Sewing Academy in Husqvarna, Sweden, under the direction of Lil Niljan, we have this beautiful book, and you have one too, because it came with your new Viking along with the instruction manual, which has a lot of really good information on the basics of how-tos, and then the creative book that tells you all the beautiful creative opportunities. And I hope today that you'll take some time with me. The first chapter actually is devoted to the Sewing Advisor, and I'm sure you've had an opportunity to work on the Sewing Advisor of the Viking. Basically, you know that it's always active, helping you so that the stitch, once you've selected it, the Sewing Advisor tells the machine what the correct width is, what the correct length is. It sets the tension automatically and sets the sewing speed automatically. Why? Virtually everything's done for you. Just as an example, if I were sewing a pair of blue jeans, I would enter woven heavy fabric, and if I wanted to hem them, I'd touch hem. And it would be that easy. My program display shows me what stitch has been selected for me, and my info display tells me all the other settings that are correct for this fabric. If I were doing a sweatshirt or something from a knit, I'd enter stretch and the weight, heavy, and then tell it what I would like to do. For example, seam overcast, if I want to do the seams and sew them and overcast them all in one step. For today, for our decorative techniques, basically we'll be selecting most of the decorative stitches with a single touch of the stitch on the actual cassette. And therefore, it's not important that we select a technique, but it's always important that we have entered the weight of the fabric we're working on, because that actually tells the machine what length and width to set up, what tension to use. So be sure you enter your weight of fabric before beginning your project. The first thing that we'd like to cover in the book, which is the first chapter actually, is the pictogram sewing. And there's an easy pictogram. Well, you may not think it's easy the first time, but I want to encourage you to make a few, because it will be easy for you, and then you'll have mastered pictogram sewing. Actually, we have a number of them on this vest that you see here, and this has created our own embroidery fabric. Gave us a lot of practice at making pictograms too. But you'll see that you've got some beautiful pictograms on the embroidery fabric, and you can create your own style. It's repeated on the front, right on the collar. I don't know if you can see that. And then we also have it on some placemats that you'll be seeing, and we have it on a blouse. So a lot of different techniques are used in this class, but basically the same easy pictogram shown on different weights of fabric. Here's the placemats I mentioned. They're of a linen, and you'll see some hem stitching around those. We'll be talking about that later. And also the blouse. Now, one of the things that people ask me all the time is, how did you transfer the design to your garment or to your piece of fabric? Well, a little hint I will tell you is that when I started pictogramming, I usually worked first on a yoke or a pocket. Then if I didn't like the first yoke I made, I could make another one. Or if I wasn't happy with the pictogram on the pocket, I could do another pictogram pocket. But today we're going to talk about transferring to different types of fabric and colors of fabric. I've made a master pattern by tracing the pattern in my book onto a piece of paper, or in this case some stitch and tear. And I'm going to take that and lay the fabric that I will be doing the pictogram on right over the pattern. Now, you received a pictogram pen with your new machine, and I hope you've had a chance to work with that. It writes in purple. Don't write checks with this, by the way, because it disappears in 12 to 24 hours. But the important thing is that you just outline the shapes you'll be doing. With pictograms, because they're computer embroidery, you don't have to do all the lines. If you just give yourself an indication of the direction you'll be sewing, that's really plenty. Now hurry up and do this in humid weather because it's going to start disappearing. There is a marker called the Wonder Marker that lasts a little bit longer. It's actually turquoise blue in color. Both of these, however, will be set by heat or soap. So use a little bit of caution. Don't iron over them while they're dark, and don't throw them in the wash to remove them because that actually has been known to set them. Now there are other times that you want to draw through a fabric you can't see through. Most light to medium colors can be seen through if you hold them up to a window. Use it as a light box, during the day of course, when the sun is coming through. Or you can use a glass top table with a bedroom light underneath it. Or perhaps you're fortunate enough to have a light box at your disposal at work or something. But a very dark, thick fabric, like a denim or a sweater, you absolutely can't trace through. And so we recommend you use a product called Aquasolve or Solvi. It's a very strange thing. It's kind of like plastic, but it actually dissolves in water. And just cut a piece the size you need, and then lay it on your pattern and trace it with permanent marker, by the way. Don't do it with a water-soluble marker, or when you spray it, the marker runs. Ask all over. And then we would tape that design with Scotch tape onto the top of our fabric to be pictogrammed. We actually do our work right through the Solvi or Aquasolve, and then when we're finished, tear the excess away and spray it with a little cold water or put it in water and it'll disappear. It's a great product for transferring designs. Okay, we're about ready to go to the machine. One or two other things I'd like to mention. You'll get beautiful pictograms utilizing a beautiful decorative thread. Here I'm using these sulky threads, which are a rayon, and they produce a very, very pretty effect. And one of the very important things that people sometimes forget is to stabilize underneath their sewing for all decorative work with either paper or, better yet, stitch and tear. Paper actually dulls your needle, and it does add kind of a residue. Stitch and tear is available by the package or by the yard, and you simply cut it up into the size pieces you need. So I have my fabric here ready to go, and I have my stabilizer, some stitch and tear underneath, and we're ready to go to the machine. So let's get started doing a pictogram, and we'll create it together. Now we're assuming that you've done some programming in your basic lesson series, but just to review it right now, let's program this first flower together. The first step in programming a pictogram is to bring the select function to the program mode, P-R-O-G. Right here you'll see it in your info display. Then find an empty memory by advancing the memory numbers. Actually, I'm going to just clear the memory that we're on simply by touching CLR. Now you'll see my cursor in an empty memory program display, so we're ready to program. To do the first portion of this flower, enter D48. That's simple. Just touch D48. You'll see it appear, but we want to flip it over end to end. So we'll touch the end-to-end mirror image, and watch your program display. You'll see it flip right over. Now we enter it into memory by touching the right cursor arrow. That actually moves the cursor to show us that we're ready to receive the next different satin element. And the next one's going to be D48 again. So we touch D48. We don't change its position. We have it entered now simply by touching stop and repeat. That's our entire program for the flower. You're going to see that we'll repeat it 4 times. At this point, consult your info display for any information you need to know to sew. The one thing that I always check for sure is, what foot should I be using? It says B. In this case, I'm using the B transparent foot. Now, in your accessory tray, you'll see you store your different feet, and I want to point out to you that there actually are 2 different B feet. The B feet have the tunnel underneath. Here's your A, regular sewing foot. It's very flat on the bottom to feed well over light and thin fabrics, but it might hang up on a satin stitch or a pictogram. So we snap on our B foot that has the tunnel for that satin stitch to feed through. I prefer the transparent foot for most pictogramming because that gives me more vision. So I'm going to snap that on right now. Aren't those snap-on feet great? And I'm putting these back in their garages so I'll know where they are. One other thing I'm going to take time to set, and that is my needle stop down. When I do decorative work or quilting or pictogramming, touch needle stop down, and that way the needle will always end in the fabric. Well, I think we're ready to go. I'm on repeat, so it will sew. I'm going to place my fabric underneath the presser foot, lower the presser foot, and sew. That's all there is to it. Actually, you don't even have to touch the fabric. Sometimes you're better off if you don't. It will sew that first quarter of the flower and stop with the needle in the fabric, and we then pivot on a quarter turn or 90 degrees. Actually, we're just coming right across the crotch of that design and sew the other side. Now here we sew the next quarter of that little flower, and once that's sewn, we pivot again. We're going around in a circle, around and around. I have put in a new needle, by the way, before I've started my pictogramming, and once more around. Generally, for decorative sewing, applique, and pictograms, I like to use a 90 stretch needle. Now, was that easy? If your first one isn't quite that easy, don't get scared. Just do it again. Tap the foot control to bring the needle up, and now you can remove your work easily. There you see we have our first portion of that pictogram completed. Now, the next step is to give this little flower some leaves, and that's going to require a new program. So, to program in the next program, I simply bring up Select Function to the Program mode, and I'm going to clear out. I'm finished now with that. I'm just going to touch Clear. And for my leaves, I'm going to bring up D48, and I'm going to end-to-end mirror image it and touch Stop. Now, you can all try that and be doing this right with me maybe. Select Function then to repeat. You have to do that for it to sew. Maybe you've done that and it's beeped at you. And once we've done that, then we stitch our leaves right out from the crotch of that design. I generally would change color for this. In this case, I'm going to do it all in the pink, but you'll see that most of the samples we changed to a blue for this. And I'm now going to pivot around, and one way to keep from having to tie off or fix with your machine all these threads and to give your leaves a vein is at this point to take out the D cassette. We have the design in program. We don't need it in there any longer. Touch A3 and shorten the stitch length to 1.5 and sew back down that leaf, right down the center of it. You're giving it a little vein. And then over to the point you want the next leaf. Okay? Touch Select Function to repeat, and it'll automatically come up to the last program that we did, or pictogram we did, which was the leaf. And so now we'll sew the leaf on this side. It'll sew one and stop, touch A3, the shorter stitch length, and sew back down. It's your choice. This is a neat way, however, to go fast and to finish off each of those. All right, raise the needle, Select Function for our next leaf, position it where you want it. I'm sure you'll see that a lot of this is just practicing and trying pictograms. They're such fun, and what I love about it is you can get the same design over and over again. You're going to see this pictogram later as the center of our log cabin quilt, and that was especially fun to make about 15 different blocks very quickly. Select Function to repeat, one more leaf, and then we've completed the leaf step. Boy, this is just taking shape really quickly. A3, and shorten up that stitch length and stitch down. I'll pull it out so you can take a little better look at it at this point. It's also a good idea to keep these threads cleaned up. Otherwise, they tend to get caught, and sometimes that can keep you from feeding. Now, there's our pictogram thus far. The next step is to add the circle in the center. And we do that. We don't even have to program it because we're going to use D37. So I'll just insert the D cassette at this point, touch D37, which is half of a circle, and I'll touch D37 and then stop, so that I know it's going to sew just half a circle and stop. Start up here at the top and sew right around the middle of this pictogram. You may have drawn in more guidelines, but the truth is with this one you don't even need that. There's half a circle. Now I'm going to raise the needle out and stitch it again to stitch the other side of the circle. I mean, that was pretty painless. All right, now my circle is all completed. What do you think? Is this taking shape quickly? All right, we're ready now to go from the circle to the center ball. And again, that's a very easy program. I'm going to put it into program, Select Function to Program. All right, P-R-O-G, clear out my leaf that's in there by touching Clear. and then I'll touch D35, which is half the ball. Now the great thing is you can actually see your pictogram appearing in your program display, so you know that you've got it right. I touch D35, I enter it by touching the right cursor arrow. I touch D35 again. Now that doesn't look like a ball. I need to flip-flop that or end-to-end mirror image it. There we have it. And I'm going to touch stop so that I get a single ball. Now, I happen to know that if you elongate this just a little bit, it'll fill that center hole better. So let's touch elongation plus once, and we get a 4. It says we're doing D35, and we've elongated it to 4. And now we simply sew this right in the center of that pictogram. Whoops, did you hear that beep? Do you know why? It's because I didn't put myself into the repeat mode. I'm still in the program mode. Once you touch repeat, you will automatically be in the repeat mode. Now, that was really quick, wasn't it? I hope you all tried it right with me and had the opportunity to stitch maybe your first pictogram design, and run right now and get a blouse and add it to the collar to make yours look really pretty. I've got it here in the multicolors so you can get the feel for it, but the truth is the white on white or pink on pink would also be very pretty. I hope you want to go and try this pictogram, but if this one isn't to your liking, I have several more to share with you. So let's go back over to the table right now, and I'm going to show you this little girl's dress, okay? Because this is a fun one. And you'll see that it's the next page in your Pictogram and So Much More book. And I think you'll enjoy the fact that this has 3 beautiful flowers on it with lots of embellishment and the leaves, and the programs are all given in your book so that you can stitch this little dress very quickly at home simply by cut your collar out, mark it, reinforce it with stitch and tear underneath, and then begin sewing. One little hint, always finish a pictogram. 2 reasons. Number 1, you need the practice. But number 2, I find that halfway through, sometimes I think, oh, this isn't coming out right. I really don't like it. But you don't know until you finish it. When you have all the colors in and all the design pieces and all the elements put together, it generally looks totally different. So be sure you finish them, especially those in the beginning. And you may want to create a collar like this on a dress of your own, or wouldn't this be pretty on placemats too? Very, very pretty design. The next pictogram design in our book is actually shown here on this green jacket. And I love the style of this jacket too. We're going to have to get Sweden to send us more information about this one because it's really a nice style. We'll show you the piping later. But get a load of the little guy and gal here on the side. I think they'd be really cute on a t-shirt as well. Now, the difference in the creating of this pictogram, which is on page 18 and 19, is that here you're going to create all the programs first. Your Viking 1100 has 9 memories, and you can put 63 different patterns into each memory, so you have plenty of creativity possibilities. And so you'll program the whole girl in and then advance the memories. You might want to stop the tape now and try these 2 pictograms, because I'm sure you're going to want to put one of these on a t-shirt, or maybe you'd like to do a jacket and add the man and the gal to the jacket. So try some pictograms this afternoon. And we do have lots more pictogram ideas coming for you from our Viking Education Department. Now, in addition to pictogram ideas, I'm going to set these aside for a minute because I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the decorative stitch options that you have on your Husqvarna 1100 Viking. This is a little picture we did that shows lots of different stitches. So many decorative stitch options, and sometimes what I find I need is just a little idea of how to apply these, and that's why these books are so great. They give you the ideas of where to put them on your garments. You can actually create your own decorative material by running rows of decorative stitches, and in this case we have some twin needle tucks too that we'll be showing you later. Or you might want to create some placemats and matching napkins. Here we've bordered our placemats with a pretty design, and then some scallops on our napkins. Quilt with decorative stitches. This, of course, being the feather stitch. And this one I can't wait to show you how to do. Our heirloom sewing programs with 2 different colors. That's going to be a little bit later in the tape. But just for now, I thought you might like to get a look at some of the things that are coming. And then you might take a very simple blouse and decorate it up, so to speak, adding a decorative stitch and a little decorative program to the yoke and the collar and the cuffs. So the possibilities are virtually endless. Simply sit down, take a few minutes, and program into your computer of your Viking 1100. Here you see some tapered satin stitch done on the yoke again of a pretty blouse, and really pretty reverse embroidery with some satin stitch and a nice program that looks terribly difficult, and thanks to our mirror imaging was really very easy to do. So let's go back and try doing a decorative stitch now. What I want to do is just go through the programming with you so that you feel comfortable. As I said, you could put up to 63 stitches in a memory. I've actually never had the opportunity to want to do that many. I've slipped in the D decorative cassette, and again I'm going to go into the program mode. I can erase by clearing my program that was in there. And let's see, oh, it's always so hard to decide. That takes me as long as doing it, but I might like to enter a leaf design. So I'll touch D15, which is a real pretty leaf, and enter it by touching the cursor. And then I think I'll put a heart in. That's D24. Enter it by touching the cursor. And oh, how about if I put in a sort of another leafy design on the other end and enter it by touching the cursor. And then we have some other pretty circular designs. The prospects are just unlimited here. I'm just going to keep going and put in a bunch of different decorative stitches. As I said, up to 63, actually 63 in a memory, for a total of 567 possibilities. So I don't think you'll run out of memory to put your stitches in. Now we're ready to sew. Again, we've programmed it, bring it to the repeat mode, and sew. And I've got a piece of fabric on here stabilized with the stitch and tear. Remember I said that was important. And you'll see it's going to create for me a leaf, a heart, and what's so neat is my cursor moves as I'm sewing, and my design moves across the program display, so I know exactly what I'm sewing and what portion I'm in. Anytime you want to start at the beginning of a program, simply touch to that select function, to that memory program, and you'll be at the beginning of it. Anytime you want to start at the beginning of a pattern or a design, simply touch that. Here we are, we've finished that off, and I'll just give you a little peek at that just to give you an idea. I hope you're using that thread cutter on the side, but there's just the idea that I was talking about where you can program decorative stitches into memory. Actually, there are a number of ideas for you in the book showing tons of different decorative stitch options. So I hope you're going to utilize those to embellish a blouse or a collar or something this afternoon. Wonderful opportunities for kids' clothing. The next technique we'll talk about is applique. Actually, your new sewing book covers 4 different methods of applique. We have a few samples here to share with you. It's a wonderful way to create a beautiful picture for your wall or to decorate table linens, pillows, sweatshirts, purses, and appliqued quilts. The first method that's shown in your book is called reverse applique. And this would be used where you were working with large pieces that you didn't want to add a stiffness by gluing down, and also for difficult fabrics. Our shell pillow here is an example of that, utilizing ultra suede, some raw silks, and some very slippery fabrics. And the method for reverse applique is explained in your new pictogram book, but I'll go through it quickly with you. The first step would be to trace your design onto some tracing paper. And I did that in a ballpoint pen, tracing it right side up. We then need to make a reverse or mirror image, as in reverse applique. So I've drawn a reverse picture, and I would take that and tape it to the wrong side of my pillow backing, okay, with Scotch tape is fine, and then to the right side I would tape on a large piece of my applique fabric. This would be larger than the design that's going to be stitched. From there you go to the machine, and I actually have done one step of that for you in advance. You can see I've taped my pattern to the wrong side of my fabric, I've flipped it over, and I've taped my peach fabric on. Now the next step would be the other shape, which is done in white, and so I'm going to tape the white fabric in place on the right side and then go to the machine, and we're actually layering is what we're doing, okay? And we go to the new Viking, and we then take and stitch, And we're going to touch A12, which of course is our little zigzag, and we're going to shorten the stitch length slightly. So I've touched A12 and I'm going to stitch length 1.5, and I'm going to stitch from the wrong side around my design. So simply stitch. I also might want to narrow the stitch slightly, okay? So you might want to narrow that stitch slightly so that you have a little bit of zigzag right over your black line. And the idea is to completely stitch around that shape. Again, I'm using the transparent foot so that I can see better. Once you've stitched all the way around, you need to trim up. Now here again, I started it for you on the peach fabric, but if you lay your scissors on its side, you'll find that it's quite easy to trim. There is a special scissors available. It's called a duck-billed applique scissors. You can see it's automatically angled, and it gives you a really good trimming surface and has a special angled blade so that you don't cut into the fabric. This is easier to do too when you're flat on a table, but just to give you the idea, I'll just trim a little bit of it. Once you have put all of your pieces down, you're ready then to do your satin stitch around them. And applique is done utilizing a close together satin stitch. Now the neat thing about our new Viking Husqvarna 1100 is that it has pre-programmed automatic applique. Stitch A14, 15, 16, and actually 17 are all applique stitches. Put stitch and tear underneath anything you're going to be satin stitching, and remember this is to stabilize the fabric, and then touch the desired width. Now this is a pretty large piece, so I believe I'll touch A15. For your smaller applique pieces, use a narrower width. For your larger, use a larger. And now we would stitch completely around our applique utilizing this satin stitch. What's so great is we don't even have to think about tension. That's taken care of automatically for us. When you get to an inside corner like this, stop with the needle on the inside, pivot and come around. Here again, you may want to utilize that needle down because that'll save you some effort, because when you, at any point you stop, the needle will automatically end down. And then satin stitch all the way around your shapes to finish your applique. The new Viking 1100 does wonderful applique. You'll see here an example of its beautiful satin stitch. Obviously we would match the thread if we were doing this in real life. One thing I didn't mention earlier is the minute you've finished doing your decorative work, then you would tear off your stitch and tear. It just tears away very easily. And of course in this case with our reverse applique, we'd also remove the paper. So we have a double stabilizer there. That's the reverse applique method. While we're at the machine, I might take just a minute to show you the tapered stitch. I mentioned that we have 3 widths of pre-programmed satin stitch, and that's a tremendous time saver, but we also have a pre-programmed taper stitch, A17. Begin sewing after touching A17. It will start with a taper and taper out from the taper. It's that easy. However, some people say, well, what if I'm doing monograms and want to start in the middle of the taper? No problem. Simply touch A17, touch your reverse once, and it starts at the bar. The cursor will actually move. If you touch A17 and touch reverse twice, it tapers out in the other direction. So there's a lot of options utilizing that tapered applique satin stitch. You can see here our taper in the other direction. Isn't that neat? So those are some tips for you when you're doing applique. Now the next method of applique that I want to show you, I have a little picture to share with you. And this little picture was actually drawn by a child, and it's a neat way to preserve your children's pictures for history. In other words, something that they can really take pleasure in. They get a little dog-eared hanging on the refrigerator. So here we have our applique picture, and here we have our child's picture. Isn't that fun? And this method we're going to utilize Wonder Under, or another type of transfuse web. This product is available anywhere that fabric is sold, and it's actually glue with a paper backing. And what you want to do is trace your design onto the Wonder Under. Now you can trace it right from the picture in this case. We would just lay it down and trace, for example, the grass, okay? So I'm tracing around the grass. I'm doing it rather quickly. Again, use a permanent marker, or a lot of times I'll use a ballpoint pen. Tracing from the side that has the sticky glue side eliminates the need to do a mirror image. Once you've done that, go to your press, and you're going to make your own iron-on fabric. I've got a bunch of little scraps here to do applique with. A real important hint is that you make sure that your Wonder Under isn't bigger than your piece of fabric. And of course, you may know why. If it is, you're going to have sticky stuff all over your iron or all over your press. So I'm cutting this down slightly, and then I'm going to take and fuse this Wonder Under to the wrong side of my green fabric, just like that. That's done quickly on your Husky press, of course. Just bring it down. It has a 10-second stop so that it will tell you automatically when it's been down long enough. I'm going to do it real quick here. Wait a couple of seconds, peel the Wonder Under away, and then, or peel, not the Wonder Under, peel the paper away, and you'll see that we've actually transferred our design. Now we're ready to cut out our shape according to our design lines. And what we've done then is we've simply taken and fused it to our background fabric. So in this case, I'd take my background fabric, I'd go back to the press, I'd take my grass, and in the case of doing this picture, I had all of them done, and I brought the press down, and in one fell swoop, I automatically had all those little shapes glued in place and ready to applique. This will add a little stiffness, but for wall hangings and small pieces, that really doesn't make any difference. It's not important. Remember, though, before you start to do your satin stitch on your Viking, whoops, back it with the fabric of stitch, or with the backing of stitch and tear, so that you have stabilizer underneath. Now we'd simply go to our Viking, and we'd touch a 14 in this case with such small pieces, and satin stitch around, add embellishments with satin stitch. Wouldn't that be easy and a fun way to recreate your child's drawing for posterity or for Grandma? I'm sure that she would appreciate having that. Now, another method of applique that we're really excited about that you have on your new 1100 is called heirloom applique. And it looks like hand-done stitching. Actually, on our curtains, on our little window here, all those hearts were put down that way. And we have a number of other hearts that I'll lay out for you to see too. And this is explained in your book. It's done on our little apron here. And this really, you need to put on a quickie apron made from 2 placemats and embellished with the heirloom applique hearts right at the top. They look like they were hand-stitched down. You'll want to cut a template. In this case, I have a cardboard template the size of the heart on my heart quilt. And I've drawn around that on my fabric with a marker or a pencil or whatever you have that's convenient at home. And then I've cut out that piece with about 1/4-inch seam allowances around the outside. Now, it's not too crucial what you cut them with, because basically I'll show you what's going to happen. We're going to go to the machine, and we're going to take a piece of pearl cotton. I don't know if you're familiar with pearl cotton, but this is a thick thread. You could use top stitching thread as well. And we're actually going to zigzag over that pearl cotton. We're going to touch A12. Everything is pre-programmed on your Viking. You don't have to fiddle with setting stitch lengths and widths. And we're going to zigzag right over that pearl cotton. Now, you'll want to use either your A foot, your B foot, or better yet, the narrow braiding foot, which is an accessory, has a little hook on it that allows you to stitch right over that pearl cotton, because you don't want to catch it. You're going to need to draw this up. I would be stitching all the way around, and then I'd draw that pearl cotton up slightly, and that causes those edges to turn right under. Isn't that amazing? So to make my little hearts turn under, in this case, of course, because we're going to be appliquing off the edge with a stitch that doesn't finish, we're going to make those hearts turn under. And I have an example over here of some that have already been done. We put our template in the heart itself, draw it up slightly, and then pull on your pearl cotton. The next step is to glue stick it to the background fabric. I don't know if you've worked much with glue stick. Just a little hint, if you have a hot heart, so to speak, and you take that glue stick and you dab it right on there, the heat makes it stick better. And then we'll stick our heart in place on our background fabric. And once more, if you do press it, that'll help it stick even better. I have glued 2 of them on there, so we're ready to go. I didn't tell you what stitch to use for this, but that's what I want to tell you now. Many times I do stabilize this with stitch and tear. You can see, depending on the weight of your background fabric, touch A36. It's a great stitch. It looks like a little straight stitch that has a little zigzag jumping over every few stitches, and that's exactly what it is. And the idea is to stitch with the straight stitch on the outside of the heart, and the zigzag stitch, it's actually a straight zigzag, which is what makes it so nice, jumping over on the heart itself. You may want to do this after you have completed putting your quilt together, because the truth is, in most cases, you would want this to be part of the quilting step. But this gives you a look at the way the stitch will actually put your heart down and give you a very, very hand-finished look. Isn't that fun? I hope you'll all try that. It's wonderful for bindings and things too. And you'll see here on the burgundy quilt backing, we have actually quilted right through the quilt. So it was part of the quilting process to put the quilt hearts down. So that's kind of fun. The next actual applique or shadow quilting technique is a similar idea to what we just did. We're going to utilize that A36, and in this case we're creating this beautiful little evening bag. Let you take a look at that very, very quickly. It's a silk evening bag with what we call shadow applique, or shadow quilting sometimes people call it. And we've cut our basic piece of fabric to be that applique piece, and then we've wonder-undered those pieces in place. Now, when you're doing shadow work, you may want a little darker colored fabric because it's going to be transfused, so to speak, or covered with a sheer. Because the next step is to put a sheer fabric right over your applique pieces, and in many cases you may want to put a batting underneath. That gives it more of a quilted effect. So you've got these 3 layers that you'll be going to your machine with. We have our batting and our purse itself with our applique pieces wonder-undered on, and then our sheer piece. Now, I took the liberty and got one started here for you, and you can see that I've got it all stitched together, and I've actually done some of that shadow quilting that you just saw me doing with a little bit narrower length, and here's a close look at it. So we simply went and stitched right around those pieces through all of these layers. Now, many times people ask me, how do you put a quilt together, or how do you put something like this together? What I do, it's like doing a big bed quilt, and there's a method called enveloping the quilt together. Take the quilt top, or the purse in this case, and take the quilt back, or the purse lining in this case, put them right sides together, and then simply sew all the way around and turn it right side out through a little hole that you've left. And that gives you a finished flat piece. Bring up the purse bottom, and we've used one of our quilting stitches, A33, to put this together. Actually, first we quilted part of the purse with it as well. Isn't that neat? You may wonder how we always started at this exact point. Every time you begin quilting a row, touch A33, and it will always start at the same point. What do you think? Would you like to make a little purse like this afternoon? Okay, now that we've finished our shadow applique or quilting, I'd like to share another type of quilting, actually log cabin quilting by machine, one of my favorite blocks. We have a completed quilt here that you'll see in your sewing book, and we're going to create some blocks really quickly right before your eyes. The first step is to square up those center blocks, and I'm going to use the ones that I made in the first exercise today, the little pictogram. And I've got a little template here that I'm using for squaring that up. So we have a couple of pictogram center blocks there. They're 2 5/8 inches square. You actually could start with your choice of size. And then I'm going to cut strips. Now, when you're machine quilting, it's best to pre-wash your fabric, but this Olfa board and cutter assembly have a way of making cutting really quick. I'm just going to cut 2-inch strips, and then we're going to go right to the machine. I have some light strips, and I have some dark strips. and my center blocks. And I'm going to go over to the machine with those, and we're going to machine piece them together a really speedy way. We'll start with a pictogram center and a light strip. And for piecing, I've snapped on my A foot. I'm going to touch A3 with 3. Now, the truth is we could basically use any stitch width we want, and we could use the edge of the foot as our guide, but this will give you an exact 1/4 inch. It's most important that you be consistent. If you'd like to just use your regular A2 straight stitch, that's fine. But this way we'll stitch along the edge of this block. I generally use a slightly shorter stitch length than normal and use the edge of the foot as a guide, and we've placed that center block right sides together with the light strip. And what I'm going to do for my second square is pick up my second center block and place that on. Now, if I were doing 15 blocks, I'd have 15 center blocks lined up on here. But actually, I've already done here the first piecing step of 2 log cabin squares. And so I'll cut these apart, and you'll see that we have a center and a log, and a center and a log. Wasn't that fast? Now, to continue and create the next piece, or the log added to that log cabin block, I'm going to take my light strip. We'll have 2 light logs to start with, and I'm going to start with the last one I've sewn up, and I'm going to push the seam allowance away from me as I approach it. And once we get the first one right, it's really easy because we just stick the rest of them in. And again, if we were doing a lot of blocks, we'd just continue stitching all these blocks this way. All right, we put our needle stop up there, and now we cut through and separate these just like so. And you'll see that we have 2 logs added to our center block. Now, if you compare that with a finished block, which I should have brought over here for you, you'll see that that actually is forming this position of the block. Wasn't that fast? This is really a speedy method. And now it's time for us to add dark. And so we pick up a dark strip. These were cut across the cross grain, and we're going to sew with the last one that we sewed up. I found that sewing with the center block up makes it easier because as you approach those seam allowances, you can push them the way you want to go. Otherwise, you have to stop in the middle, and every time you've sewn, you have to press. And so this is pretty fast, and then I just press at the end when I'm all done. So we would then press that seam allowance away, and now we've added one dark block to our log, or to our log cabin square, and you can see that we're getting around. And we'll add one more, and then I think you're going to be able to visualize that we just keep sewing around and around. A lot of times when I'm doing this, I have somebody sit across from me at the machine and snip them apart as I'm sewing. And then it goes really fast because you can just concentrate on sewing and they pile them up next to you. As you approach the first seam allowance, push it away from you, and the second one, push it toward you. That will get your blocks laying nice and flat in the end, because all those seam allowances will press really flat. So I'm sewing with the edge of the foot as a guide, my straight stitch, A33, right along the edge, and now I take and snip through and cut these apart. And I think you can see that that log cabin block would go together really quickly. I would continue now with light on this side, dark on this side, until I had the desired number of rows. In my case, I did 3 logs of dark and 3 logs of light. Now, once you've created a number of these blocks, I actually have 12 to work with today, you have several different options for putting them together. Thanks to the magic of video, here we've arranged our 12 blocks into the streak of lightning pattern. Here's the start of another pattern. You probably would want to make a few more blocks and keep this one going. This barn raising pattern is my favorite. You'll need at least 16 blocks, but what a neat square wall hanging. Create a totally different look by reversing the dark and the light in the barn raising pattern. It's your choice. Always put your blocks down and stand back and look at them before you decide. The next step in our quilting process would be to assemble the blocks and then envelope the quilt together and quilt it. This goes really fast. Now we'd like to talk about several machine smocking techniques. and I have a number of samples to share with you. This little girl's dress has a machine-smocked yoke. You would always sure up the fabric first and then cut the yoke shape so that you get the right size. We have a pillow here too that has a smocked effect across the front of it, and both of these were created by smocking or shirring over pearl cotton. This is available at craft and sewing stores, and I'm going to use my buttonhole foot. There's a little finger at the back of the buttonhole foot that will actually be looping that pearl cotton over. If you've done corded buttonholes, you know what I mean. So I'm going to snap on my buttonhole foot, okay, and then I'm going to take the pearl cotton, and it's got to be twice as long as the area I'm going to be shirring or smocking. And I'm going to loop that over the finger at the back of the foot. I've already drawn some straight lines on the right side of my fabric so that I hopefully can sew some nice straight smocking. All right, the next step would be to select a stitch. This is usually done with a decorative stitch, and I'm going to choose D21, and I'm going to elongate it to 4. And you could even elongate it more if you like. I'm going to lengthen it slightly too, and that would be up to you. I would always experiment with this technique on some scraps of fabric before you start. All right, we're beginning to sew now, and I actually started off my fabric there, but I'm going fine, and we're going to just sew. Now, don't hold on to this pearl cotton. It's amazing. The foot actually just feeds that right in the right grooves, those buttonhole grooves, and even as crooked as this is, it's going to stitch right over it, and when we're finished, we'll be drawing it up. That's what gives us that actual smocked effect. So if you do need to just keep it going a little straight, don't hold it back. Okay, once you've sewn it, you may want to sew several rows, but ultimately, to smock up your fabric, you simply draw up on that pearl cotton. So in this case, we would run several rows, draw our fabric up, and then cut out our yoke. Isn't that easy? All right, we can also create elastic smocking, and this is really nice. This is a cute little child's top with a midriff that is elasticized, and actually the bottom of, or the top of the little skirt is elasticized too. This works well for cuffs as well. And you're actually doing the same technique, but instead of sewing over pearl cotton, we're sewing over an elastic thread, or a very thin tubular elastic. I'm looping that over the finger at the back of the foot, and this time, instead of working from the right side of the fabric, I've drawn my lines on the wrong side of the fabric. Again, there's a number of stitches that you could choose for this. The one suggested in the book is actually D3, which is your big cross stitch, so we'll touch that one today. But anything that will clear over those threads without catching them, without stitching into them, is fine. Here again, don't hold it back. Stitch over those threads, just let them lay, and when you're finished, and again, you might want to run several rows of this smocked effect. But when you're finished, you'll actually be drawing this up. Now, you can also increase your top thread tension. You know that you can increase that manually if you want, even though it says in the book that everything is automatic. There are some decorative techniques that we'll want to increase that on. Once you've sewn that, then draw up that elastic. And from the right side, you have a pretty little cross stitch that has an elasticized effect. You might want to run many rows, as we've done on this little skirt. But won't that save you time? This is a great technique for doll clothes as well. The book also talks about wing needle smocking, and I'm not going to take time right now to sew that for you, but here's an example on our Swedish blouse, and this is just multiple rows of stitching with the wing needle, which we'll cover later, stitch D4. And not stabilized, and because it's not stabilized in a number of close rows, it actually will cause a shirring or smocking effect as you're sewing. So that's another way to create a mock smocking effect. And then finally, in our smocking section, we talk about what they call grid smocking, and you're actually forming a smocked fabric by drawing a grid on the back. Now, what you'll need to do is take a large piece of flat fabric and mark it off in 1-inch lines, okay? Then, along the first line, mark it every inch. And then, along the next line, mark it on opposite inches. So actually, this is 2 inches, 1 inch, 3 inch, 5 inch, 7 inch. And then this would be 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches. So this is going to be kind of an alternating effect. The next step is to use the button program. Now, if you haven't got button programmed into your machine, do it right now so that you have it to sew your buttons on with. Consult your video or your handbook as to how to sew the button program. We'll snap on our A foot, and we're going to bring up our button sewing program, and we're actually not sewing buttons with it. We're creating a bar tack effect. We're simply sewing at all of those cross points, and our button sewing program takes several stitches in place, then jump to the next one, take the next one, jump to the next one, and so you're going to be doing that button program at every one of those cross points. Well, I don't know if you heard that little beep, but that's one of the things I love about my new Viking. It tells me when I'm running out of bobbin thread. Now, I know I probably have enough to finish this exercise for you, but it's pretty incredible that sometimes when I'm in the middle of a project, I'm going to get beep, 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 and I know not to go too much further. It's especially nice when I'm doing something decorative. And by the way, you don't have to take your work out to wind a bobbin. Simply open the bobbin window and then take it out. So there we have several rows of the grid smocking sewn, and you'll see what happens on the right side. Once you've done that, then cut out your desired pillow top, or in this case we've got a little oven mitt. Isn't that fun? Heirloom sewing has been done by hand for many, many years. In fact, since before the turn of the century. But today we create beautiful heirloom garments in a fraction of the time, utilizing some of the special stitches for heirloom sewing on our new Viking 1100. We want to share with you now some of the beautiful hem stitches and entre-deux effects, some of the tucks and the twin needle work, and also how to make your own two-color insertion. So if you'll step to the machine with me now, we're going to first work with the wing needle. Now, the wing needle is a very, very fat needle. A lot of people say, my goodness, you know, that's going to poke a big hole in my fabric. And actually, yes, it is. That's the idea. We want it to poke a large hole in the fabric and create a row of holes. That's what we call entre-deux. Entre-deux or entre-deux is actually French for to set in between. And I've inserted a wing needle. I'm working on a natural linen cotton fabric, and I have fine thread. Stitch D7 is the one that I've touched, and then I simply sew utilizing my A or B foot depending on the weight of the fabric. And I'm now going to remove it and show you how I've created a row right on the machine of the entre-deux stitch. We would use this for lace insertions, but by itself it's a beautiful hem stitch, and there are several others that create beautiful hem stitching, D4 being one of my favorites, but actually that whole first row of stitches is suitable to be used with the wing needle. And you'll want to experiment with fine thread and on a natural fiber fabric and see some of the special effects that you can create. Many of them are suitable for borders and can be trimmed right up to the stitch. To do lace insertion with entre-deux on each side, simply take a piece of insertion lace and lay it right on your fabric. Now, if you've never done it before, you might want to stitch it in place with a straight stitch, but it's really quite simple to simply lay it in place and stitch it in place with either D7, which is my favorite for the entre-deux look, or with one of your other hem stitch effects. You'll notice I've stabilized this linen and cotton with stitch and tear underneath. You can work without it on some fabrics. You'll want to experiment on scraps before you start on your garment. Once you've sewn down one side, the next step then is to sew down the other side. And so I'll put it back under the foot and sew down the other side of my lace. Pre-wash your fabrics before you make your garment, and in most cases I like to spray starch them. This often eliminates the need for the stitch and tear because it stabilizes the fabric really well. Here you can see the entre-deux stitch on each side of the lace insertion. The next step is actually to turn this sample over and to remove the stitch and tear and to trim out behind. And sometimes that's easier to do right with the stitch and tear in place. So you lay your scissors on its side and trim out right behind the lace. And now you have a see-through effect. Now, was that not easy to get that lace insertion effect? I'll show you right there. And I've done that on this little sample that I'm holding in my hand. I did it before we started to show you the way I've trimmed out behind the insertion, and also the lace edging, which was done by simply laying that lace along the edge, stitching it with the wing needle and stitch D7, and then trimming out the fabric from the back. Wouldn't that be pretty? You've seen that on some of our samples already. It's actually on the sample that I'm holding in my lap, which came to us from the Sewing Academy in Sweden, and you'll see this lace inserted with the entredot stitch, some rows of entredot, and then they've got some rows of straight tucks. Now, these tucks were created using our blind hem foot. At this point, I'm going to remove the wing needle because we're through doing the poking of holes in our fabric, and I'm going to replace the needle with my regular sewing needle, and then we're going to snap on our D foot and fold our fabric. There are several ways of creating tucks. This is, of course, an easy one to get the folded tuck effect, as you see on that little dress, but you can also create tucks with the wing needle. The D foot for blind hem, touch a straight stitch. We can either touch seam or we can touch our regular A2 stitch. I'm going to fold my tuck like so, and then I'm going to stitch right along the edge of that. Now, technically, we want to move that needle over to the left, so let's snap in our A cassette and touch A1, move that needle over to the left position by touching A1, and stitch right down that tuck with the edge of the fabric riding right up against the edge of that D foot. It actually serves as a great guide for tucking. It's also very nice for top stitching, and you'll see the effect here. So that's one way to create very easy, fast tucks in our heirloom sewn pieces. You can also create tucks utilizing that twin needle effect. I've got several different sizes of twin needles shown here, and without stabilizer, sewing with the twin needles on lightweight fabrics, the fabric will automatically tuck up. So that's another option to use in your heirloom sewing. Now let's talk about the two-color insertions. These are so exciting. You can buy two-color insertions, but they're very expensive, and they're done by commercial machines, which sometimes lack the precision and aren't quite as pretty. I'm going to snap on my decorative B foot, and for the first insertion, I'm going to work with the lilac thread, and we're going to stitch the little balls that are in that. Now, we're going to simply put our thread in place. We'll utilize this spool pin and thread up the machine with a lilac or a pinkish thread for the ball part of that design. We're going to then bring up the program. This is all laid out in your book for you. I took the time to program this earlier, so I'm simply going to go to the program for that design. There it is. And it actually has a row of stitches between the design that's the leaf stitch or the ball stitch. In this case, one more here. We'll stitch the little balls, and then we'll come back and do the little leaf design. So I sew along, I get a pretty ball stitch, and then it jumps about an inch and stitches in between. I'll show you that. That's due to the program. We've actually programmed a long stitch in between. Isn't that neat? We'd be on a garment, we'd come back and we'd remove those stitches, use the seam ripper that's included with your machine, and it does go real quickly. I'll take one out just to show you how quickly you can remove those. Now the next step is to thread up with green. Of course, you'd be doing a little bit more area here so that you'd have a bigger amount of stitching to do before you rethreaded. So easy threading though, just simply lay it in place and thread through the needle. And now you position yourself right at that pink ball position, and you will then begin sewing, and you'll be amazed. We'll bring up our program for the leaf. There it is, and we'll start sewing right at that ball, and it sews the leaf right in between the two little ball flowers. jumps over because we've programmed that in. And by the way, as you sew this, you'll notice it programs in a fix. You have a fix position on each one of your cassettes. And when that's entered into program, means it will tie off at the end of each of those programs so that you can remove the threads in between. That's a very exciting feature, especially for creating two-color insertions like this. Our next step would be to take out that thread in between, but wasn't that fast and easy? You may not have noticed, but actually my heirloom blouse was sewn with the same techniques that we've been talking about. You'll see the twin needle tucks, the lace insertion, the lace edgings, and of course the two-color insertion designs. Now, the next technique we'd like to talk about is cut work. And this also has been an age-old technique done by hand. I have several samples of it here. The beautiful blouse that you have in your sewing book, the cut work, of course, being the places with the holes and the satin stitch around it. And what I'm going to do is show you this technique. Beautiful for lapels and table linens. And I'm going to set this aside and then show you just quickly a couple of other color-on-color versions of the same thing. Ultra suede with cut work, and in addition to that we have some linen with a cut work lapel and then the satin edges, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So how do we do cut work? Let's go to the machine and find out. The first thing you want to do is to trace your design onto your collar. I've actually done it here on the edge of a collar, but in addition to that, I'm going to work on a small piece of fabric. And I've got my little teardrop type design traced on, and I'm going to my beautiful Viking, and I'm going to touch A2 straight stitch and a shorter stitch length than normal, about 1.5. And then I'm simply going to straight stitch all the way around. Now if you have your needle stop down, that'll help you a lot in these pivoting places where we're going to pivot around this design. And so straight stitch around it twice. What we're doing is stabilizing it up well. We have stitch and tear underneath. I think you've noticed that, and that's going to keep it stable also. Once you've straight stitched around it twice, the next step is to cut that hole out. Now it's pretty hard to cut this hole out without cutting your stitch and tear. So if you cut the stitch and tear, don't worry about it because you can always put another piece underneath. Actually, I did okay here, and I think I'm going to leave my stitch and tear intact so I won't have to worry about it. But you notice I'm angling these scissors on their side so that it's easy to cut. You might want to trim a little more carefully, but you'll see that it's very easy now to finish it by touching A14. This pre-programmed satin stitch on the Viking 1100 is so wonderful. I'm using my transparent B foot, of course the B foot, so that it feeds well over that satin stitch, and the transparent so that I can see better what I'm doing. And once I get to my corner, this is an outside corner, it's just like applique really, except there's no applique fabric. I'm actually appliquing a hole. And I'm going to stitch all the way around this design on outside corners, end with that needle on the outside and come back over it, and then stitch back to the point where you started. And there you have some cut work. Now wasn't that easy? When you're finished, of course, in any situation where you're using stitch and tear, you would tear off the stitch and tear when you're done, and in this case the cut work stitch and tear pulls right off. You can also use Aquasol for stabilizer there, but you can see when we call it cut work, it actually has a hole right in there. Choose your satin stitch. You may want to use a narrower, you may want to use a wider, depending on the size of your cut design. There is a limit, however, to how big a cut design you can do. Now a similar technique would be satin edges, and this would be finishing collars, cuffs, table linens, all kinds of different things with a design. I'm going to bring up another collar. Isn't this a gorgeous one? You also have this pictured in your book. And we have a decorative stitch, a row of entre-deux, and one of our especially pretty satin edges on the D cassette. And you've got a number of different stitches on that D cassette. You'll see a row of, say, D26, 27. Actually, D28 is the one that was used here. When you stitch that the first time, don't let it throw you. It stitches the edge and then it goes back and forth, filling in with a seed stitch, straight stitch type look. So let's try this now on the edge of our cuffs. Actually, we'll insert the D cassette, and what I like to do is to cut my cuffs or my collar and straight stitch them together. Now they're interfaced, and what I've done is put wrong sides together and straight stitched on my 5/8 seam line. So you can see here's my cuff ready to go on. That's the wrong side, and here's the right side, and it's straight stitched in place. Then I'm going to, of course, stabilize with stitch and tear. This is a must for all of your decorative sewing. And touch the desired satin edge. I'm going to pick the wave stitch. That's one of my favorites. It's D26. And then we're simply going to stitch around utilizing this. Now I'm using sulky thread, which is going to give an extra special appearance. I'll also utilize the beautiful color on white. However, white on white would be very pretty. Touch stop as you approach a corner, and that will stop at the end of a pattern, and then you can go around that corner. Even if you're not right on, you want to finish with a completed pattern at a corner. Then completely stitch that edge. And I've got one here that I'm going to go to, but you can see how we stitched down around and how nice our corner worked because we touched stop and finished it that way. The next step is to trim that. And here again you need a nice sharp scissors, and you trim very close to your stitching without cutting your stitching. Some people freight check that edge before trimming it. It does add a little bit of stiffness, but it does help. You, of course, let the freight check dry then before you trim, but it does help firm up the edge. But you'll see now that we've got a really nifty cuff, all finished like the very, very expensive blouses. We could do the front of our blouse that way. We could do our collar. You can add this satin edge embellishment to just about anything. One more finish that I usually do on my Husky Lock, but can also be created easily on the Viking 1100, is called rolled edge. And this is something we use on napkins and ruffles. You see it here done on the edge of a piece of fabric. And what we're going to do is snap on our C foot. That's our buttonhole foot, but it has a lot of other uses. It's pretty amazing. So snap on the C presser foot, okay, and then go to a piece of lightweight fabric, and you'll need your A cassette back in. So slip that one back in, and we're going to touch our satin stitch again, pre-programmed satin stitch. What a time saver to not have to keep setting that satin stitch and adjusting length and adjusting width. And then we simply sew down the edge of the fabric. Now this time we don't want stitch and tear underneath, okay? Because if you put stitch and tear underneath, it'll keep it from rolling. And put the edge of that fabric right in the right-hand groove of the buttonhole foot. You can see it, you can actually see it poking out right in front of the C. And as you stitch, it's pretty hard to see on the tape, but when you do this at home, you'll see how that fabric just automatically rolls as you're stitching this very fine satin stitch off the edge. It's amazing. It's going to look narrower than it is because it's caught up in the roll. And this would be a very, very nice finish for any lightweight to medium weight fabric. You can create a very, very nice rolled edge this way. Now, charted needlework is another technique that resembles handwork. And I'm going to bring the needles over right now and a few of the samples. Some of them you have in your book to watch, but to look at and check back to, but others are some new ones. Here you see a charted needlework picture. And this is actually a satin stitch that's stitched over these little tiny knitting needles. They're laid on the fabric and stitched. I'm going to do it for you in a minute so it'll be a little bit clearer for you. But isn't this a fun picture? And this one wasn't too hard to do because it's a lot of continuation of one color. It's rows and rows of satin stitch. You'll see this little girl with the umbrella in your book also, and that's got a lot of pretty colors in it. And you see where the stitches were formed right over these knitting needles as we sewed them. And so there's another example of knitting needle or charted needlework embroidery. Sort of resembles a hand crewel effect. Here's an initial on a sweatshirt. This time the knitting needles were laid on the diagonal, which gives a whole different feel to it rather than the vertical feel. And then they were stitched over. And our little Mickey Mouse clock, which he's been around for a while, but we enjoy him. He hangs in our education department at Viking, so we thought we'd show him to you. And finally, I want to share a shirt that I just love. I borrowed this from a friend so that we could share it with you because it has all the flags of the different countries, and they're all done in charted needle in different directions. You can see how the needles were laid one way and then they were laid this way. And she's taken our block lettering, which is of course on your B cassette, and written the names of the countries over and under the flag. So neat. And she actually finished, this was a ready-made t-shirt, and she finished the neck edges with one of the decorative stitches. So you can create something like this. Very, very fun. Why don't we do the little Swedish flag? That might be a good one for us to practice with our Viking Husqvarna. And so I'm going to say that we have patterns available many, many ways. You don't even have to buy a ready-made pattern. You can take a design from a coloring book or something. But here, for example, was a pattern for a sweater that would work well in knitting needle embroidery. You can see how the vertical and horizontal lines would work well. I'm using one of the purchased patterns for flags, and I've taken and traced the Swedish flag again with permanent markers. You can buy needlepoint markers that are permanent, and that's what I would recommend. And I just laid the tracing paper over the flag and traced that flag off onto tracing paper, or the Aquasolve works well too. So once you've traced your design, now you're ready to go to the machine. And of course you need to thread up in the colors that your design is in. I'm not going to take the time today to thread up because I think basically you can see, and we have several other techniques we want to show, but I'm going to snap on my A foot. Now lots of people do this technique freehand, and that's another option. But with your pre-programmed satin stitch, this is so easy to just simply touch your satin stitch that we're going to A14, the narrow satin stitch, and stitch right over these little needles. And so we get lined up with the needle, and I know this is like, oh my goodness, we're going to hit the needle. No, we really won't. You can try it by hand. I was going to show you that, but the truth is you can visualize this pretty well, and it is amazing. It just drops right into place, and you'll see that you will stitch right over this knitting needle. Once you get to the yellow block, stop and skip over it. Of course, we'd have blue thread on, and we'd be skipping over it at this point, and we'd keep going. Now, we have one row completed. That was pretty easy. And so once we've done our first row, then we're going to insert a second needle. So we take and insert the second needle right next to the first, and you want these needles virtually butting up against each other. Always sew with a needle on the side because it's going to keep the threads raised. And now we sew the second row. Again, this is sort of like applique, except we're appliquing our satin stitching over knitting needles. Now move on a little bit over the yellow blocks of color, and then stitch over the needle on this side of the yellow block. And there you heard me hit the needle a little bit. Actually, it won't hurt anything, except I probably should change my needle when I'm done. And now we would keep going, lining those needles up and stitching right through the paper or the Aquasolve. Again, we do have stitch and tear underneath to stabilize that. And I've gone a little bit further on a sample here with the right colors that I thought I could share with you. When you're done, come back and clean that all up. And ultimately, what you're going to have is a finished Swedish flag once you cover all of the ground with the picture underneath. Isn't that neat? Okay, now I've got a little cheater's method for you, because the truth is these little knitting needles are very hard to find. You usually have to go to a sewing machine specialty store to find them. And we have a way of doing this that you can stitch over the little wire that's on your J foot. Now this is included with your Viking 1100. It's actually for overcasting. Many times when you touch seam and overcast, the info display will tell you to snap on the J foot, and it's to keep the threads that are jumping over the edge from drawing up your fabric as you overcast or seam and overcast. But we're going to cheat and use this for the charted needlework or knitting needle embroidery. I've snapped on the J foot, and thanks to our right needle position zigzag, which is A13, and the fact that we're going to shorten this down to about a 0.5 length, we can stitch right over that little wire. Now what I like to do is, besides shortening the length, I narrow the width, proportionate really to the design I've drawn on. Here I'm at 2. And this will give you that raised kind of a effect as we stitch over that little finger. I'm going to take it out and show you here that it does give you the same type of a raised zigzag. And then what you do is just run your next row right next to the first. Get yourself lined up really well before you start, and run that second row right next to the first. And if you can't find the little knitting needles, which do give you more of a raised effect, and of course the fact that it does support the one before, it keeps them a little more raised. But you can simulate this effect, or you might want to try it with the J-foot before you go on and purchase the needles and get going. So try some charted needlework. It's a fun technique to try. Okay, the next technique in your book is lace insertion. And this is sort of similar to what we did before, but when we did it on our entre-deux stitch, we were doing heirloom sewing, and now we're going to do it with a satin stitch. This beautiful tablecloth, you can see, I want to hold it up for you so that you can see the beautiful insertions. There's a lovely pictogram on there too. Let's get it out here. And you'll see that that lace was inserted and then finished with a satin stitch. So it's a satin lace insertion. You have that extra finishing touch there. And this is just as easy or even easier than doing it with the entre-deux stitch, and that's what we're going to do right now. We would take our fabric. In this case, we have the white fabric, and if it's very lightweight, stabilize it up underneath with some stitch and tear, and lay your lace in place. And the first row of stitching, touch A12, which is your zigzag, and narrow it down to about 0.5 and shorten it up to about 0.5. And so now you simply stitch along each side of that lace with A12. And this goes very, very fast. So you stitch down both sides of it. And for the edge lace, we would do the same thing, except we'd only stitch down the edge. We wouldn't obviously stitch down the bottom edge. With the edge lace, we'd lay it in place. I'll move a little slower here. Move it in place, and we just stitch along this edge. Okay. The next step is to trim out behind it. And so we would take our scissors and trim right down the middle of this lace. And of course, you want to do this without cutting the lace, but it's really pretty easy to get in there. Okay. Then go to your ironing board or your press and press these seam allowances back toward the garment or away from the lace, like so. Now I've actually done this on a little sample so that we could go a little bit faster here. You can see I've stitched my edge lacing on, I've stitched my insertion lace in, and I've pressed those edges back. The next step, working from the right side, touch A14, which is that narrow satin stitch. You see how often we utilize that. And stabilize again with stitch and tear. We're of course using our B foot because with a satin stitch we want to be sure that we're going to be able to feed real smoothly over this satin stitch, and that tunnel underneath lets us do that. And we simply stitch right back over the original zigzag stitching, but this time with the close together satin stitch A14. We do that on each side of our insertion also. We'd run that A14 right down those edges. On our tablecloth, of course, it was done white on white, which was very, very pretty. The final step is to remove the stitch and tear from the back, just tear it off, and then trim up closely. Here again, laying our scissors on the side, and you can use your applique scissors for this. Trim up real closely to that satin stitch edge, and then you have your completed, finished insertions and lace edgings. Isn't that neat? So we have a really nice finished effect there. Okay, actually this completes most of the techniques we're going to show. There are some more practical techniques in your book, and since this was a creative tape and in the essence of time, we're going to just finish with a few of our accessories. Now, actually there are over 30 accessories available for your Viking Husqvarna 1100, and accessories can really cut down on your sewing time. It's amazing. I'm going to be showing you the 7-hole cord foot, and this is kind of an interesting one. I have a few samples here, and I'd like to share those with you. We've got some sheets and pillowcases and a towel where we've stitched through the 7-hole cord foot right over a pearl cotton decoratively. And I'm going to be showing you how easily that's done in just a minute. On the sheets and towels, it's more of a white on white. You know, lots of people don't like decorative stitches or decorative effect. They think they look gaudy. But keep in mind that when you keep the tones similar or the same, you get a very, very tasteful, expensive look. And here we have our ribbon stitch stitched over pearl cotton in an off-white color and combined with a beautiful pictogram on the edge of this sheet. And then we have some matching pillow shams that I have underneath here that I'll just show you real quickly. You can see that they're done in sort of a square design. So that's a fun look that you might want to try and decorate up some of your table linens or do this on your clothing. The 7-hole cord foot also works really well for doing monograms very easily. Now it comes with a needle threader, and what you do, you thread this pearl cotton through the holes in the foot. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but there's 7 little holes in this 7-hole cord foot. That makes sense, doesn't it? And you bring the needle threader up through the underside of the foot and then loop your pearl cotton, or you can do this, of course, over yarns, heavy threads, lots of other decorative things. It's good if you have the end of that cut a little bit sharper. And even with the needle threader, I'm having trouble seeing this, but we simply then pull this through to the wrong side and thread it. Now I have one threaded over here in several different colors, and the neat thing I like to do is get it all threaded up and then roll it up on a ball. But you can see I've got 7 pearl cotton lengths through my 7-hole cord foot. Tie a knot, by the way, at this end if you're going to store it, otherwise you know what happens, it pulls through. And draw your design on a piece of fabric. If it's a lightweight fabric, it's really important, again, to stabilize this up with stitch and tear. In this case, with denim, I might not need to, but we're going to anyway, so we don't get puckering. Snap on that 7-hole cord foot with the length of thread or pearl cotton out the back, and then select a stitch that will cover the cord and hold it in place without stitching all over it so that the cord's going to peek up through. I'm going to start with just our regular, what we call 3-step zigzag. What just amazes me is these can be pretty squiggled up here at the start, and as I go through the machine, they will get pulled out nice and straight. And so I'm turning a real sharp curve here. Let's get back to the straight direction so we can show you this, but you can go right around your design. Now some of the other stitches that work very well are some of your decoratives, for example the feather stitch A35 and some of the stitches on your D cassette. But I just wanted to give you an idea how quickly that goes. Isn't that amazing how it just stitches right over that cord, lays it all out in a pretty order. Obviously these could be all the same color or they could be many different colors like I have here. So that's the 7-hole cord foot, one of the many accessories that's available for your Viking Husqvarna 1100. The gathering foot is another one, and on the tablecloth that we've been working at all this time, you'll see that the bottom skirt is gathered on, and that went really, really quickly utilizing the gathering foot. So I'm going to go to the machine now, and first let's just gather up a length of fabric. This would be great for a pillow or tablecloths. I've actually used it on clothing too. And their gathering foot is kind of a strange looking foot, and one of the things people don't do, and they call and ask, how do you get this on the machine? It has a little bar right here that actually has to go in front of the shank. So be sure your needle's in the highest position when you do this, okay? And just bring that bar up over, let me get my hand out of there so you can see. Bring that bar up over the shank, okay? And it needs to snap on real firmly. So as you go in there, be sure that you hear it snap in place. Otherwise, you're going to have problems as you start to sew. And there's a little bitty shank in there. Did y'all get this foot snapped on okay? Good. Now we're going to touch straight stitch, and I'm going to A2, of course. I'm going to lengthen my stitch. Now the longer my stitch length is, the more it will gather. And in addition to that, the higher my tension is. And don't be afraid to touch your tension, because your Viking Husqvarna 1100 will just adjust it right back for you automatically the minute you start doing regular sewing. Did you see how my ruffle is just gathering right up there? Isn't that great? And I'll hold this up where you can see how well that gathering foot worked. Nice, even gathers. This works on light to medium weight fabrics. If you were doing a very heavyweight fabric, you might want to utilize a a ruffler for it. And we do have a ruffler, of course, too. Now, you can also stitch this gather and apply it to the foot all at the same time. In this case, place the ruffle underneath the foot against the feed teeth and place the fabric that you're applying it to in the little groove on the foot. Can you see that? That little groove that I've slipped it into there. And in this case, we're going to touch left needle straight stitch, A1, because we want to catch as much fabric as we can. And again, we'll lengthen our stitch up. I do have my tension up too. And now we stitch. Don't hold back the fabric on the bottom. You have a tendency to think they should be feeding evenly, but actually the bottom one is going to feed through a lot faster than the top. But you'll be amazed how quickly you can attach a ruffle. This is what we did on our tablecloth. How quickly you can attach that ruffle to your garment and get that job done real quickly. What do you think of the gathering foot? Isn't that a great one? That worked really neat. Now, I'd like to share the hemmer feet with you. Anytime you need a narrow hem, and again, we use this on our tablecloth. We put a little narrow hem on that. And I've got 4 of them lined up here. And I want to share the fact that they have different little grooves in the bottom of them. And if you take a look at those grooves, there's a real narrow one, 2 millimeter foot. There's a medium one, a 3 millimeter foot. There's a wide one, 4 millimeter. The actual groove in the bottom of the foot is going to be the width of your finished hem. And my suggestion is that you use the lighter or the narrower feet for the lighter weight fabrics, and of course the heavier your fabric, the wider the tunnel should be. I'm going to choose the 3 millimeter foot here and work with some linen-y type fabric, and I'm going to snap off the gathering foot and snap on that rolled edge foot. Always be sure your threads are under the foot and to the back before you start to sew, and utilizing your thread cutter over on the side is really a good feature because it holds those threads as you begin to sew. Now we'll go back to our regular straight stitch, A2, okay, and I'm going to remember to put my tension back to normal. And if you ever get really confused about that, where is normal, simply turn the machine off and turn it on, and automatically your new Viking will come back and preset itself, calibrated right to the right tension for your sewing weight of fabric and your technique, so don't worry about it. Lots of people say, yeah, I like those hemmers, but I can't ever get them started. And so what I want to share with you is the easiest way is to just fold the hem by hand for about a ½ an inch, and then this of course should be the width of the tunnel underneath, and then place it under the foot and begin sewing. So take a few stitches into the hem, and once you've taken a few stitches, then stop with the needle in the fabric, just tap that foot control, raise the presser foot, and give it a tug right up into that scroll. You'll see how it just sort of tugs right up in there, and then simply sew. You'll be amazed. Now, don't help this too much. Lots of people go like this and help it, but just holding it in a vertical position and holding it back from the foot a ways usually keeps it going in really well. So there we have our hemmer foot. And you'll find that that will save you a great deal of time in doing hems on the bottom of tablecloths, on little ruffles, anywhere you want a little tiny rolled narrow hem. Okay, the final accessory we're going to talk about is one of my favorites. It's called the piping foot. You saw the piping earlier on the jacket. There's lots of places we use piping. And this foot looks like a regular presser foot very much, but underneath it has a groove. Let me flip it over and show you. It has a groove underneath, whoops, and that's where that piping is going to track as we sew. It's just amazing. The piping will just lay right in there. Whether you're using it to make piping or cover cording to make your own piping, or whether you're inserting the pre-purchased maxi piping type that I've got here, it works wonderfully either way. So I'm snapping off my hemmer foot, and I'm going to snap on my piping foot. And of course, if I were covering piping, I'd be taking and laying a piece of bias over a cording and simply slipping it in. In this case, I'm going to insert piping in between my pieces of denim all in one step. So there's one piece of my garment, There's my piping laid in place with my seam allowances matching, and there's my top piece. And don't panic. You can't see it, but don't worry about it, because once you start sewing, it's just amazing. See how this is sandwiched together? That foot, even through this thick denim, that foot will track that piping. I don't even need to touch it. Just brings it right in place, and from now on you won't have to worry about having your piping with different edges. It's set in perfectly every time. Won't this save you a lot of time? I wish we could show you lots more accessories, but for today our time is up. We at the Education Department at Viking Sewing Machine Company hope you have enjoyed this taste of creative sewing on your Viking 1100. Why not create something today? Until next time, happy sewing!